Thank you so much, Richard. Everybody, thanks to Richard. If my panelists, if you all could come join me up here, I'm going to just start introducing you as you're making your way up here, and we'll get started right away. I also want to acknowledge Scott Evanbeck is here from Gutman Community College, everybody. Bill Trueheart from Achieving the Dream is here. Really glad to have him here today. Lonnie Threet from the governor's office is here, I believe. Lonnie? Oh, he had to step out. Well, anyway, let me go right to our panel here. Thomas Bailey, as you heard probably about 5 or 6 times in Richard's speech, is just doing amazing work here in New York. Is the director of the Community College Research Center at Teachers College and director of the National Center for Analysis of Postsecondary Education and Employment. From 2006 to 2012, he directed the National Center for Postsecondary Research. I could go on and on, but you have more information in your packet. Johanna Duncan-Poitier is Senior Vice Chancellor for Community Colleges and the Education Pipeline for SUNY. She provides system oversight and coordination for SUNY's 30 community colleges that educate 250,000 students with an annual operating budget of $1.8 billion. And at SUNY, she led the launch and development of a statewide collaborative cradle-to-career partnerships, the Smart Scholars Early College High Schools, and several other really innovative programs. Pleased to have her here today. Ann Kress is the president of Monroe Community College in Rochester. Her career spans more than 20 years in higher education, with special interests in topics relating to student access and success, global education, workforce development, technology, and the intersection between traditional liberal education and essential 21st century learning outcomes. She currently serves on Governor Cuomo's Regional Economic Development Council. Stan Litow has been a longtime mentor to me and to the Center for Our Future, so for that reason I'm really happy to have him here. But he's also the president of the IBM Foundation and IBM's vice president for corporate citizenship and corporate affairs. I think pertinent to this conversation, he was really the driving force behind the establishment and expansion of P-TECH. I think we've all heard so much about P-TECH, and it's really hit the trifecta where you have had in just the last year, I think, President Obama, Governor Cuomo, and Mayor Bloomberg a few months back, all really kind of heralding and helping to expand this really innovative program, which spans grades 9 through 14, creating a seamless connection from high school to college to career. Felix Matos Rodriguez is the president of Ostos Community College in the Bronx. Trained as a social scientist, President Matos Rodriguez previously held leadership positions in foundations, universities, policy centers, and branches of government in which he combined his scholarship with social policy, advocacy, and change. So I want to open this to all of you. We're going to have hopefully a casual conversation. We're going to really try to focus the conversation on solutions today. Feel free to jump in at any time. I'm going to start by asking Tom, in part to respond to what you heard Richard say before, and I guess with a little more specifics that, we've heard that community colleges are seeing higher enrollments. There clearly is a lot of potential with a lot of changes we're seeing in the economy today, where a high school diploma is no longer enough. But it does seem like there's work to be done, and I want to start with you and say, what needs to be done to really harness the potential of community colleges, and I guess college completion is part of that. But if you were advising New York State, what would you say to get behind the community college and the student success movement?
Glad you asked me a small question there.
Feel free to keep your answer to under 30 seconds.
Yes, that's right. Oh, I wish I could. Well, I think, first of all, I just want to say, because I can't believe I go back and count, and I've been studying community colleges for almost 20 years, And the difference between the discussion now and when we started the Community College Research Center in 1996 is just fundamental. So while I think it's true that we get, that there's still this image of the sort of, smaller child or something, or somebody that's an institution that's neglected, I mean, it has changed tremendously. So I think we should be encouraged by that. I think the sort of image of the four-year college that, most of us went to, that's kind of the image of higher education, and that really dominates the discussion. But those things are changing. So I do think that it takes a while, but just in terms of judging the kind of interest in discussion and policy discussion and just things that are taking place in state legislatures as well as at the federal level, I think we should really be encouraged by that change, and people are beginning to realize the significance of these institutions. Now, I don't, what I think, I mean, I think that Richard gave a nice summary of the kinds of challenges that we're facing. We're going through a transition from a philosophy of an institution that opened its doors to anybody, which is great, and it did that successfully. And we're now moving to looking at taking much more close look at what happened to those students when they get there. I mean, I know there are many things I can say. I do think that one thing that's very significant, I just want to emphasize something Richard said. I mean, students basically, when they come to our institutions, are pretty much on their own. I mean, and they come into a complex institution with lots of choices that's very confusing. And I think that's a crucial question. I mean, certainly we've seen ASAP, Donna's here, and one of the things that ASAP does is try to provide support so that those students really aren't on their own. And they're on their own in the sense of, they don't know what they want to do. They don't get much help in determining what that ought to be. If they do have a goal, it's not clear how to achieve that goal. And as they move through the institution, it's not clear where they are on that road to a goal. So I think that's one of many things that it's not been emphasized as much as it needs to be. So I would say that in terms of the sort of broad solutions to that is to try to make the institution less complex. That reduces the need for the kind of hand-holding that we think is necessary. But at the same time, then we have to realize that we can't leave those students on their own. And if that takes resources, we have to provide those resources.
Great. And Johanna, could you give us, I mean, this is not a small system. We're talking about more than a couple of dozen community colleges across the state, different types of communities, different types of students. What are we up against, and what kind of support would you like to kind of, move the needle in some of these directions that Richard and Tom have talked about?
So first, thank you for the question. Thank you for the attention that's being given to the subject. It's incredibly important, and I guess I'm on now. It's a real pleasure to have this conversation with the folks that are in this room. It's almost preaching to the choir. So many of you are already committed to this and recognize the absolute importance of making sure that more students graduate from high school and college prepared for the workforce. Your presentation, Richard, was very, very helpful. Thank you for it. I will say that I think the challenge is as great as has been described, but I don't think the picture is so glum. I believe that right now, community colleges are really getting the attention that we had always hoped they would. They're more attention than perhaps they ever have in history. I must admit, I don't remember seeing the bubble before, so I loved seeing it. But it is, I think, because of that and because of the potential for so many students to have a meaningful career opportunity, that community colleges are getting the attention they deserve. So to your question about what do we do, wouldn't we love to see more support? So while I think that we are getting a lot of support, I don't think a person in this room would say that they wouldn't want more, that they wouldn't like more resources. We certainly all would. But we have to be realistic. We're not going to see dollars that are going to be flowing from the sky somewhere. We have to find a way of doing things very differently. And so with the system that we have, one of our largest community colleges, president sitting next to me, Ann Kress, with 30 community colleges, 275,000 students from the tip of Long Island to the Canadian border, and that's geographically, that's a challenge in and of itself. We have so many students who do want a better life, who do want an opportunity to not only graduate, but also have a terrific career. So I think that as we look at support and resources and finances, what we did at the State University of New York is we brought together everyone who has some stake in this to the table. That includes our colleague Tom Bailey as a researcher. It included our college presidents. It included folks from CUNY. It included folks from our K-12. We had John DeGotti. We had folks from the governor's office. Lonnie isn't, oh yeah, Lonnie's there. He was on our task force. We had government, K-12, higher ed. We actually had students at the table to talk with as well to figure out what can we do. And I would say that there are three answers: partnerships, partnerships, partnerships. Really maximizing the resources that we have. So one, we can prevent students from going into remediation in the first place. Everything from the bridge programs that we have and maximizing the use of what we know is a successful model. Looking at students earlier, having early diagnostics, not just tests, but we're saying diagnostic assessments, finding out what students need before they graduate from high school, and in partnership with higher ed, giving them what they need so that they will graduate without the need. Second, looking at K-12, innovative partnerships. Looking at higher ed, innovative partnerships. We already know that 40% of the students who come to our community colleges are adults. They're not first-time, full-time freshmen coming out of our high schools. We have enough of a challenge with those, with 40% of those students graduating with a diploma who are not college ready. So looking at innovative strategies, and we're looking at them so, again, we can maximize the dollars that we have. And the third category that we looked at with our remediation task force is how to pay for it. To look at innovative financial strategies. How do we recraft or reposition the dollars that we have, and looking at new dollars, such as what has been an influx with P-TECH. How do we strategize in a different way so that we will get more success, better results for our students? And it's an exciting time to truly look at success and scale up.
Thank you. And Anne, you know, I just hope to get your perspective, and ultimately Dr. Matos Rodriguez is on from a community college, an individual community college, and can you tell me about what are some of the things you're up against in moving the needle on student success? What has worked for you to kind of see improvements, and are there things that you'd like to see and do going forward?
Sure. Thank you. Well, there's like 1,000 things, more than 1,000 things I want to say. But so let me preface this, though, by saying that I've spent my entire career in the community college sector. I started as an adjunct, I taught English, I taught writing at the community college level, so I saw students when they first came in, and this was in Florida. And when you see that data up there, understand when you look at New York State's data, the data for Florida is closer to 80% of the students begin in developmental work. Of course, they don't anymore because the state has done away with remediation, which will be exciting in a couple years. So, but you know, when you look at the challenges that we face, I mean, certainly the preparedness of our students is one. And so let me segment what we can do better with remediation versus the reality of the preparedness level of some of the students that we serve. And let me talk a little bit about our community. Monroe Community College is in Rochester, New York, which is in Monroe County. Monroe County is really the tale of two cities, if you will. There's the county and there's the city of Rochester. The city of Rochester school district has a graduation rate of significantly less than 50% of the students. Of those students on state tests, about 9% of the graduates test college ready. We see students who come to our institution, high school diploma in hand, who, when we give them the placement test below the lowest level of developmental education we offer, which effectively has a floor of 8th grade. So they've somehow graduated high school, but can't really achieve 8th grade mathematics. So we're now working on some side projects to try to bring students who are that far below where college level is, because let me put a pin in that and go back to the slide about STEM. I've got to tell you, you're not going to succeed in any STEM field if you don't have basic math skills, if you don't have basic reading skills, if you don't have basic writing and communication skills. So to accelerate those students to their detriment isn't going to help them or help us or help our economy or our communities. So we've got to be really careful about that. But we're working on pilots with Khan Academy. They've been really excited to sit down and have conversations with us about how we can build systems outside of our traditional systems to help students prepare for the AccuPlacer, to help students build their skill sets. We've been working on programs, summer bridge programs, where we've been able to really accelerate students potentially through 2 levels of developmental mathematics or reading in the summer, just by intensive work around practices that we know do work. We learn those practices in college readiness centers. We have 3 now in Rochester City School high schools. And we have been able to accelerate those students, sometimes 2 levels of developmental education, just by intensive work after their regular high school curriculum. And maybe that's one of them calling right now to testify. But we also have been doing some test preparation for the AccuPlacer, because what we see is basic things. Students who don't know anything about higher education come to us and think they can use a calculator on the AccuPlacer. They can't. And someone needs to tell them that. And someone needs to sit down and do some review with them of basic math skills before they sit for the test. We've got an initial pilot on that going on, and just by asking them to pause, asking them to reflect, here's some test preparation materials, can you review these, can you make an appointment? We've reduced the number of students who place into developmental courses by about 25%. That's a very simple to do, right? And then you need to build all of these other systems around students to make them successful. And so let me, CUNY has ASAP, we don't have ASAP. It's got a great return on investment. The last word in return on investment is investment. We forget that. And it's not an inexpensive program. We're partnering as part of the SUNY Department of Labor grant around the IBEST, the Integrated Basic Skills that came out of Washington State. Again, not an inexpensive way of delivering those skills. Once the grant's gone, we've got to find another way to pay for that. Those are all challenges. And the last thing I'll say before I stop talking is I came to New York State from Florida. I know a lot about Florida. And when you look at those numbers, and you mentioned Florida as a state that has high graduation rates, that's not an accident. Students have an incentive to graduate with an AA in the state of Florida, and it's the transfer agreement. You can't transfer to a state university in the state of Florida from a community college if you don't have your associate's degree. And that's a big incentive. Don't underestimate it, and I'll tell you how big it is. After, most of the folks in the room may know about the Aspen Institute Prize for Community College Excellence. After they did the first cut during the first session, or the first year, I talked to one of the first folks who did the research behind it, and also talked to Josh Weiner and said, doesn't it seem weird to you how many Florida colleges made that list? I worked in that system for decades, and I appreciate the great work, but it seems a bit of overrepresentation. And I said, you know, look at what happens in that state around policy, because policy drives behavior. And if students know that there's a golden ring if they can finish their associates and they can get right into that university that rejected them first off, they will finish that degree. Right? And when you look at the factors around completion and how they factored into the Community College Excellence Prize, you'll see why so many Florida colleges. And that's, you know, Texas now has caught on to that. Illinois is doing some of that. You know, that's something when we talk about the SUNY system that I'll sit up here and honestly say is still a difficulty for many of our students, is that transfer. If they knew they had the guaranteed transfer with their 2-year degree, I can almost guarantee you'd see those numbers start to climb just because there's that basic incentive.
Thank you. Stan. You know, there's been a lot of focus on P-TECH, but I wonder if you could speak to why you create a P-TECH. And I guess my understanding is part of it is that you, like a lot of employers, IBM, like a lot of other employers, aren't necessarily getting students with the skills that you need. And I wonder, you know, can you speak to that and kind of talk more broadly about what do community colleges have to be doing better to produce the the workers that you're looking for?
Yeah, thank you very much. In terms of this problem, it's not a problem for community colleges, it's not a problem for K-12, it's not a problem for business, it's not a problem for government. It's a shared problem because it's a very, very big problem, and it's very hard to focus in on like one segment to produce a solution. We've got the highest youth unemployment rate since the Second World War. And it's a very, very difficult situation. And it creates a crisis around skills in the U.S. economy. And it's interfering with U.S. competitiveness. And it's at the crux of a problem that we have to solve, but we have to solve it together. When you ask about the private sector, there was a study of Fortune 500 companies about your recent hires into the workplace. And people were asked to document what they thought about those recent hires. And people said 70% of them lack problem-solving skills, 70%. 70% of them lack writing skills, and 70% of them lack business ethics, basic business ethics. That's what employers said about their recent hires. That wasn't about community colleges. That was all sort of recent hires. So we have a challenge in terms of improving preparation. So what was behind the idea of PTAC was to sit down on the table, roll up your sleeves in a deep partnership and collaboration with the community college system, starting with CUNY and now moving towards SUNY and other community college systems around the country, the business community and K-12, and figure out a way to solve this problem together. Because the problem, and when you sort of look at it from the community college standpoint, is this lack of skills and lack of ability to be college ready. So what we're asking the community colleges to do is something that has to be solved working with the K-12 system together. We did a little piece of data analytics on one CUNY community college, neither the best nor the worst, Queensborough Community College. And for students who registered and began at Queensborough, and if they were taking 2 remedial courses and one of them was math, 99% of those students dropped out before the end of the first semester. 60% of them dropped out within 6 weeks. So they were simply not college ready. They had a high school diploma, they weren't college ready. In the city of Chicago, Chicago City Colleges, which has about 100,000 students, their completion rate is 7%. 7%, 93% don't complete. So the idea that people are college ready is not accurate. So we have to solve that problem. And an integrated program, that's what PTEC was all about, is beginning in the 9th grade, integrate workplace skills with academics, not strong academics, incorporated with workplace skills, with mentors from IBM, with workplace learning curriculum, with structured workplace visits, with paid internships in an integrated way, so that instead of winding up with students who are not college ready, wind up with students who are not only college ready, but ready to complete. Ready to complete. Right now, there are 9 different job categories at IBM where we hire people with AAS degrees, applied science, computer science. Somebody who comes out of PTEC with that kind of a degree, we're guaranteeing first in line for jobs. And why are we doing that? Because for a 6-year period, we're engaged and involved in helping make sure that they're going to wind up not just with the credential, but the preparation to be successful. So we've got a very large problem. It's not the community college system's problem to fix. It's not SUNY's problem to fix. It's not CUNY's problem to fix. It's not the government's. This is a problem where we have to work together in a collective way to recognize the fact that the level of youth unemployment doesn't work, the level of completion, 2-year programs, 4-year programs doesn't work, and the U.S. is no longer competitive. So we have to do something large scale to solve this problem. And we've done these things before. At the end of the Second World War, we made high school mandatory, right? Before that, it was an option. This was a big change, a very large change. And in the second half of the 20th century, it was a very important part of the solution, which made the U.S. not only competitive, but a leader. Things like the GI Bill of Rights. Big ticket solution that helped to make the U.S. competitive. If we chip away at this in a small way, I don't think we've got a solution. So I'll offer two suggestions beyond really expanding this P-TECH model. And I've been outside the U.S., I've been to a variety of different states. People are very excited about it. The president visited the school. They came up with a $100 million challenge grant program to be able to reinvent high schools. That's what we need to do. We need to reinvent high school so that significantly larger numbers of students wind up with the ability to be college ready, to be able to get the credential, to be able to take 21st century jobs. There are plenty of them, but we have to get people the right skills. So here's two suggestions. We've been celebrating the war on poverty. One of the things that was instituted at that point was the Federal College Work-Study Program. It's not as much money as it used to be. It should be more, but it was designed with a big federal funding stream of about $1 billion to be able to give students a work opportunity to earn tuition. That's not enough. The work opportunity needs to be about skills and preparation. So that $1 billion, and maybe it should be more, ought to provide incentives for students to work not on campus, although if they had opportunities to work on campus and jobs that would give them skills and credential, that would be fine. But in the library and cafeteria doesn't make it, as far as I'm concerned. Give them an opportunity to work in government, business, not-for-profit organizations in a way to prepare their skills so that they get not only tuition money, but skills. Make it credit-bearing, give it an opportunity, allow people to match it so that large numbers of students would be able to not just have the tuition money, but the skills to be able to advance. Number two, we have something called the Perkins Act, which provides money for career and technical education. We used to call it vocational education, but it's outdated. It needs to be completely changed. It's not a second track for students who can't succeed. It's a first track for prepare people for 21st century jobs. That's another $1 billion. So right now it goes out into formula, it goes out to the states, and they basically can do what they did last year, just turn up the clock one more year. So make it focused specifically on the labor market and where the jobs are and are likely to be. Make sure that business and employers are at the table in the development and design of the curriculum, and fully align the curriculum in high school to the curriculum in the community college so you can create a clear path. If you take the $1 billion for federal college work study and the $1 billion for Perkins Act, that's a good start to try to use existing dollars, not a nickel more, although if we had some success, I think we could probably get more interest in additional funding to be able to tackle this problem of preparation for 21st century jobs. And business can't sit on the back bench and wait for somebody else to solve the problem. There are examples where that public-private partnership has been successful in the past. I'll give you one, the discipline of computer science. That was created in the United States. It was created by a company. It wasn't created by higher education operating alone. And people don't remember it, but it has been very, very successful in fueling economic growth. So I think that the answer to the question is that's a big problem, a very large problem. It's not any one sector of the economy's problem to solve. It's something where we've got to solve it together. And it's so critical because we have a skills crisis in New York State and every other state. There are jobs that are available, but we can't hire people without people having the right skills. Last year we spent at IBM $600 million on training for our employees. and they all walked in the door with degrees. So over 50% of all the training costs in the United States are paid for by the private sector. So we need a more focused, specific set of solutions. It's got to involve all sectors of the economy operating together. It's not one person's problem to solve. And nobody can sit outside and say, I'm waiting for somebody to solve this problem for me. This is a problem we have to solve together.
Thank you, Stan. Felix, one of the things Stan said was that, so many students come into community college and they're not college ready. And, I understand that a pretty significant number of your students are in this boat. And I wonder, obviously that's a major obstacle when it comes to college completion, which is one of the things we're talking about today. And, what are the most important levers that can help some of those underprepared students? Are there things that you're seeing working, and what kind of help would you like to see to help with some of those students kind of get past those hurdles?
Clearly, remediation and obviously Jonathan knows that in our case at Hostos, about 90% of our entering class needs at least one remedial intervention, and about a third of our new first-time students are triple remedial, needing remediation in math, reading, and writing. So obviously, and you've read the reports and you've heard the comments here, it is challenging, and when you add to that, 70% of our students come from the Bronx, so they're likely coming from maybe not some of the best performing schools in the system. Between 13 and 18% of all those students are GED, right? And about 80% or so come from households that earn less than $30,000 a year. So you have elements of socioeconomic challenges, lack of academic preparation, all the things that we know make it difficult for individuals that have the drive, the desire to educate and achieve social mobility to advance. And address some things that, like Monroe, we're doing on the area remediation. I think that going back to Tom's point about and the presentation on advising and how that is really a very, very important component that requires a lot of attention. And what, for example, we talked a little bit about ASAP here before, and it's clearly has been a very innovative program that has been developed by CUNY, and we're all hoping to see how it can scale up, right? And that's the question, right? That we have very good results so far. Can you continue as you grow in a program like that to achieve similar results, maybe even at a lesser cost? And that remains an open question, right? And I think everybody's hopeful that it would be, but time would tell. But one of the things we've done is to learn from programs like ASAP, right? I mean, we're, after all, colleges, learning institutions, and we should be able to look at data, example, things that work, and try to adapt things that you do. And we did that. I mean, if you look at some of the literature that's come from ASAP, two things were identified by the students who participated as sort of key to them and in their success in the program: receiving a Metro card and the advisement, right? So we decided to create a program that focused on advisement because we thought that we were not doing really a good time. We had maybe 3 full-time staff members responsible for the transition into the college of about between 1,500 to 3,000 students before they connected with the more formal side of advising in academics, right? Clearly a recipe for not incredible results. So we developed a program. It's a student success coach program. And since the fall of 2012, we're the only community college in CUNY, in which when you come in, you get a letter that says, Jonathan Bowles, welcome to Hostos. Felix Matos Rodriguez is your student success coach, and he's your coach until you either graduate or you transfer. And that person remains assigned to you, throughout your stay at Hostos. And that person combines some of the work that the advisor will do until you get transitioned into the department or the academic advisement in that first year and a half, but they also are college navigator in terms of connecting students with all the different things that they face in the school. Give you an example. Literature tells you, early alert system. They're good for retention, they're good for graduation, right? They're good if you have people that can follow up on what the students are doing, right? If you send an alert to 3 people that take responsibility for 3,000 people, it's not going to do much. We're going to begin doing now because now we have a way to have, the kind of resources that would be able to talk to the student when the alert comes from the faculty, connect the student with the appropriate services in the campus, and follow up and make sure the student is taking advantage of those things. We didn't have that capacity before we had the coaches coming in, right? And that's based on what we learned from ASAP. I mean, it is not, ASAP had a ratio of 1 to 60 or something like that. Our ratio is like 1 to 175, still large, but the heck of a lot better than 3 to 3,000 any day, right? The other thing that is done is that it has allowed us to match quantitative data with qualitative data to improve programs. I'll give you an example. If you ask me, I'm a ready college president, I would tell you that we lose 15% of our students from the fall to the spring, right? What I was able to do with the coaches is have them in a meeting, and all the ones, the last fall semester to the spring, I said, I need you to tell me why every student that you have as one of your coachees who's not here in the spring is not here. So we can use that data first to bring them back, right, at some other point, right, to stay with them, and then also to create programs, and I'll make, in my next intervention, if you let me, we just got a grant from Citibank, and we're beginning an exciting new program that was based on feedback that came from the coaches. Qualitative data, quantitative data, and that's what we're all trying to do in terms of advancing, moving the needle here. One thing that I wanted to say, there were some references to the levels of attention that community colleges were receiving. And I just want to say something about that, right? Because I think Anne, in her Florida comment, says something which is brilliant, and which is there's comparisons and there are comparisons, right? And I am not that interested in levels of attention that compare apple to oranges and things that really do not help us to fundamentally improve things, right? And there's a lot of that going on, right? And that attention I can live without. I don't mind attention that's precise, focused, and fair, that would allow all of us to do a better job. But the ones in which you're hitting moving targets, they're not going to help the students that Stan talked about. They're not going to help the businesses. They're not going to help New York City and New York State. Attention that I do like, right? I was part of the Century Commission on Community Colleges, and one of the data elements that floored me was the discrepancy in the average amount per full-time student in private schools gives investment of endowment, right? In private colleges, they get, per full-time student, $46,000 a year in private philanthropy going to those students. Community college get 372. 372, 46,000, right? I want that attention from philanthropy and the endowments, right? And I mentioned that because if we go back to the assumption that state and city dollars are going to be somewhat limited, which is true, right? there's only X level of efficiencies and innovation that would allow us to do a much better job with constant dollars, right? And the other side of the equation is we don't want to charge the students more tuition, which has been one of the things we've been doing. So I think that one of the elements where we need to find ways to make connections is connecting community college a lot more with philanthropy, right? If, for example, Ostos is 46 years old, if we've had a program when Ostos began in which New York State matched dollars that philanthropy and foundations gave into our endowment, right? And we had $500,000 every year that we could put into the endowment. We have now about $25 million in the endowment, right? With that, I could fund 250 students, 1/4 of my entering class, free of tuition. Or I could have used that money to create a linkage program to business, or I could have created a program because those are flexible dollars, right? So I think that in the next layers of innovation, one side of attention that we need to find ways to do is connecting a lot more philanthropy and community colleges. So we have flexible dollars that allow us to support our students and to innovate.
All right, well, thank you. You know, I want to now just kind of ask a question for everybody, and I'm going to start with Tom because I feel like you've been sitting here waiting for a while and probably have a few thoughts to chime in. But, you know, you mentioned philanthropy, but before we get into that, you know, I think it would be wrong not to really kind of, you know, put some onus on state policymakers. And I guess I really want to ask, you know, there's clearly been progress. I think, Johanna, you talked about, you know, you think there's more attention in a good way on community colleges. I think clearly we've heard about some great models and pilots that have been happening from ASAP to what Felix talked about with the coaches, and I know, Ann, with your kind of collaborations with industry in so many ways. So there's a lot to build on. But for all of you, and starting with Tom, you know, what could the governor, the legislature, what's the role of state policy to kind of, you know, move the needle here, to help the community colleges to maybe put more responsibility and accountability on community colleges? What's the right mix that you think, if there was one or two things the state should do?
Well, first, I know it seems to be these days to say we want more money seems to be, I don't know, it's not something you're allowed to say. And I'm not sure why we should say that. I do think that, I mean, one of the things about research, which when it does show that things work, you know, we have evidence that various approaches work, and that gives you a much better kind of platform to say, okay, this works, something else doesn't work, it's cheaper. That's true, but it doesn't work. So I just want to say, I don't know, there's these swings back. We've been through a 20-year swing where it's sort of forbidden to talk about, let's spend some more money on this. I think we should talk about that because we, you know, I do think that what's happened in the last, you know, 10 or 15 years is we have identified these problems much more. We have focused much more on what happens to students in colleges. And now we're at a point where we've got a bunch of different ideas. Some of them have been shown to be effective. And I think we should talk about trying to expand those. And I don't think those are going to happen primarily by reallocating money. So just let me say that. Now, I do think that that states in general have an extremely important role to play. Trying to bring about reform at the retail level. I mean, that's great. It's interesting for us to go to a lot of different colleges. We have a state system in this country. And I think the state needs to lead that reform. How many SUNY colleges do you have? That's a number I should know. 30. So we're going to be much more effective if we can be operating on all. I know it's not that centralized, and we'd like to have a more centralized system maybe to bring about these reforms. So I think that's very important. One thing I would have to say is, this is kind of perhaps a plug with self-interest. You're going to get much farther if you have an integrated data set. I mean, it's hard to know what your students are from high school and what were there. I mean, one of the problems we've identified is the assessment system is very bad. Yes, a lot of students come in with weak skills, but many students actually are put in developmental ed who don't need to be there. So one role the state can play is improving that. And one of the ways to do that is if it was easy to get the students' high school records, if we knew that. So I think that's important, as well as the employment outcomes, because that's what we're talking about. Now, I know there's been some changes in New York State recently about the availability of tying UI data to transcripts from college. That needs to go forward. I'm not sure how to bring that about, but if we could easily look at students from K-12 through college and into the workforce, that would be a huge benefit in both understanding what the problems are and for arguing, for those solutions. So I think that's a crucial role that the state can play.
Well, before I go on, let me just follow up, Tom, and say that, okay, so money, let's put it on the table. And I know this is doubtful, unlikely, naive, but okay, let's say there's $1 billion. What do you say to policymakers in New York? Where would you put that money?
Well, okay, I think that I think this sort of comes from what is the diagnosis. And I do think, and sort of maybe to tie together the high school relationship, the high school college, sort of transition. We get students coming in. Now, of course, I just want to say, obviously, somebody's going to say we have a lot of adult students who aren't coming directly from high school, so this isn't a solution that will deal with those. But nevertheless, we have a situation where students come in, they don't really know what they want. And I think there's a huge difference between students who are directed and those who aren't. So certainly that I think that's a crucial aspect where tying back to the high school, would help out. I mean, the P-TECH students, obviously they've been in one program, and the issue of transition from 12th to 13th grade isn't a big deal for them. It just happens like normally we have from 11th to 12th grade. So I certainly think that there's a lot that can be done with that type of a relationship, and providing funds to do kind of partnerships with high schools and colleges. I think that's an important. So that we, right now, what happens when a student comes? We really have an intake system where we'd like to help them figure out what they want to do, put them on a track. And the main thing we do is we test them for 2 or 3 academic skills, which aren't the types of skills that the employers want in some cases. And then we provide them for remediation. That is our intake system, our remediation system, which doesn't work very well. So I think that a crucial thing would be to try to help provide resources that will help students come that are more prepared, that is not only prepared academically, but prepared in figuring out what it is they want to do. And so I think that probably means some resources available for that function when it gets to college. That function, I think, can come from technology. So I think we need to make some investments in that so that we can use technology to help figure out which students need the most help and which students don't, so that we can kind of strategically use those resources to the students who need that help the most. So I mean, that connection and how to get students firmly attached into college and into the college level program that they're going to be in, I think is a crucial area, and I would think that we should be putting some investments into that.
Thank you. Everybody else on the panel, whether it's if you had money or if you didn't have money, what would you ask of the state? And again, we're not guaranteeing it, and it may be unlikely, but I think we ought to at least kind of think ambitiously. What should the state do?
I have an idea. Big surprise. And I'm going to go back to a report that came out in New York State maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and it was from Skills to Compete New York. And these weren't starry-eyed idealists. This was a workforce education report. And we were up there we used labor market information, real-time labor market information a lot to drive the programming at MCC, especially around workforce education. So one of the findings in Skills to Compete was a recommendation that the state provide for every adult citizen 2 years of post-secondary education at the time that was appropriate for that individual. So if you think about what's the power of that, so now I'm going to cut with not precise labor market information. I'm going to cut with a buzzsaw, not a scalpel. But if you think about how the state's economy works, every state, basically, for every one job that's out there that's going to require some sort of graduate education, you're going to have 2 jobs that will require a bachelor's. And you're going to have a little over 6 jobs, so let's call it 7 jobs, that will require something more than a high school diploma and something less than a 4-year degree. We can call them skilled jobs, we can call them middle skills, we can call it anything we want to. But if you think about where the state is going to get the biggest bang for its buck in terms of investment of that $1 billion, my guess is it's going to be with those 7 jobs. And so we just heard the state of the state. I think the governor has a lot of great plans for attracting more industry to New York State. My question is, who's going to be employed by these companies? You know, I'm in upstate New York. I'm in the Finger Lakes region. We have food processors who can't find folks who can do food processing, right? That's a form of advanced manufacturing. We have a robust optics systems industry in the Rochester region. Those folks can't find employees. They can't expand. And I think the state needs to start investing as much in talent development of its citizens as it has to great benefit in, you know, tax credits and equipment for new employers. Because I will tell you, if those folks can't find employees, they will not stay here, no matter what tax credits or what incentives you give them, because they can't make their contracts. So that's where I would put that $1 billion.
Okay.
I'll give you a couple of ideas. First of all, I think we should congratulate the governor for, in the budget, coming up with a couple of really creative ideas that would make an impact. He called for 10 more P-TECH schools. There are 16 that were started last year. I think you can obviously ramp that up significantly. So I think that would be a good thing. He provided an opportunity for having, you know, free tuition at SUNY or CUNY for students who pursue STEM careers and work 5 years in the state. That's a creative, and I don't know another state that's doing anything like that. So I think that's pretty good. I'd like to see some effort to channel that federal college work-study money. So the state could encourage, with financial incentives, community colleges and 4-year colleges to provide more of those kinds of opportunities off campus related to skills. That's a way to leverage existing federal dollars in a big way. I think, you know, coming up with a statewide plan around CTE and Perkins, I think would be really important, as opposed to just waiting for the reauthorization, which I hope is going to come. A strategic plan for the state that connects K-12, community colleges and higher ed, and the business community, and then look at all the various funding streams together. And the last thing I would say, to pick up on the point that Felix made about philanthropy, is that if you look at philanthropy and if you look at private sector support for higher education, it's for those higher education systems that you have direct connections with. So if you don't have a direct connection with it, you're not going to give it a whole lot of money. But if you can do these things that we're talking about, where you create a meaningful connection, then you're going to see the dollars flowing based upon the relationships that are built. We match dollar for dollar everything that our employees contribute to higher education. Last year, that was $25 million. Hardly any of it went to community colleges because there was no direct connection to community colleges. I now have about 1,500 of my employees who are doing direct mentoring with students in P-TECH schools, and they're starting to contribute to those schools. But they're doing it because they have a direct connection. So, I mean, I think that it's, again, let's not look at one piece separate from all the pieces. Let's look at it in an integrated way.
Oh, no, you go ahead.
Ladies first.
Okay. So I like everything that's been said. I especially like the idea of having $1 billion appear on our desk.
Consider it done.
I love the idea of greater philanthropic efforts. Both SUNY and CUNY are involved in it. I think CUNY actually got to the table sooner than we did and are probably ahead of us. I agree with what Stan said, that not only does there have to be a connection, there has to be connection with people who have the money to give. And unfortunately, if you look around the country, it's the private institutions that have the endowments, and the more the colleges have, the more they seem to get. So I love the idea, and I think all of these are possibilities, and I especially like the billion, but realistically, if we're thinking about this as an opportunity, a time when we are clearly looking at the challenge, and everyone is, and that's what I'm saying, I don't think the challenge is great, but the possibilities are just as great, and if we seize the opportunity, I think we can see some real results, and I believe it's going to require some structural changes. As was mentioned, the governor has come out with a number of innovative ideas and has provided support. This time last year, there was money for a job linkage program. There's money for GAP, which is for remediation support, support that we appreciate. Even if it were 10 times as much, however, it's not enough. For us, when we look at, and I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Deb Mickle and Jay Quaintance, and we were looking at, our year in review. What did we do? And we are so excited about early college high school, which I would say is at the #1 top of my list. Because if we know that we can prevent students from needing remediation in the first place, more students graduate, and I'll just give you the one success. How many people in this room have heard of Roosevelt School District? How many of you, keep your hands up, how many of you are aware of it being a challenged school district? Well, so early college high school, 100% of the students who were at risk of dropping out, 100% of the students who graduated with 13 college credits, did not need remediation, and graduated on time. I mean, it's huge. These are kids who they were saying we're going to drop out. Early college, high school, P-Tech, this is about systemic change. Having said that, so my colleagues and I, we were looking at the numbers, and we have about 6,000 students in Smart Scholars Early College High School. We're looking at P-Tech, another 6,000. We're like, oh my God, this is huge. It's not some little program, 100 kids, or 200 kids, or 1,000 or 2,000. We're looking at 14,000, and now more. But it's still a drop in the bucket. We have 275,000 students in SUNY's community colleges alone. We have so many adults who want to come back to our community colleges and who, because they didn't have a premier education, are coming back with the need for remediation. So we have to do some things very differently, because even if we got $10 billion, when I think of the K-12 budget, the billion goes like nothing. So we have to have some systemic change, and it really is exactly what was mentioned. It's a problem for all of us. The business community, the K-12 community, the higher ed community, by bringing their resources together and saying this is a problem for all of us. And we at SUNY really take this very seriously. There are folks that say to us from the outside, why is higher ed so concerned about K-12? Well, we recognize that you're the pipeline, and that students are coming in, and our community colleges are open admission, so yeah, we get why you care. No, we prepare the teachers who prepare the students who are going to succeed or not in the classroom. We prepare the largest number of teacher educators. So right now we're working in partnership with the State Education Department, in partnership with our privates as well as our CUNY institutions, to better prepare our teachers so they're ready for the Common Core. So when these teachers are out in the classroom and they're with students, they can prepare them like no others. That we will be way ahead of the rest of the country. That's one. Making sure that these kids are exposed to college, and again, there's an assessment, and you give them what they need before they graduate. And it's not just in high school, even though I love early college high school so much. It has to start so much sooner. We're talking middle school, we're talking elementary school, cradle to career. If we really want to see change, we do need, dear God, thank you, President Kress, we do need a greater investment. But if we get a greater investment, we have to use the money differently if we want to see the dramatic change that we know we need for our students, for our families, and for the workforce. PISA, I'm just end with that. PISA, you're looking at the PISA scores. We're flat on the PISA scores. in terms of STEM. It's not as if we have lost ground. We've lost ground from ranking 23rd to, I think, 34th now, not because we are done anything differently, but because others are surpassing us. China and the rest of the world, they're learning and going way beyond us. So we just need some fundamental change that's systemic and large scale.
I'll take any of the programs that my colleagues have endorsed here today because they will all be helpful to the work that we do. And I concur with Stan, too. One of the things at Hostos we said our workforce development strategy and work is also part of our development strategy. Macy's is going to open a new store in Co-op City. I go in, and the first thing I do is not ask them for money. Is tell them, I want to be a resource to you. The next conversation, I'll ask them for money, right? Our school is next to, when I came on board, we're next to Hunts Point, the food basket of the Northeast. Our school had no relationship with them. It's the joke that I have is like if the president of Detroit Community College said, we don't do anything with cars, right? So those two things absolutely linked. I already gave you my pitch for the state either giving other tax breaks to people who donate to the foundation of the community college or matching those dollars. And then Anna and I will be able to be creative and use them in any way that we want, scholarships, create some other programs. In our college, for example, we use some of that money to pay the fee for CUNY Start, another program that was innovative done by CUNY to help with remediation, $75 fee. We were concerned that some students would think that we didn't really want them in the college. So we're the only school that I tell them, you do CUNY Start, you complete CUNY Start, you take the test, and you re-enroll in Hostos, and you get your $75 back. Because I really want you here, and this program is about helping you out. It's not about me not trying to get you into college. I can do that with flexible dollars. One other set of dollars that we can use, money for the summer. We're talking completion. We're talking acceleration, right? K-12 learned years ago that the summer hole is an issue, that disconnecting those students was bad for them educationally. It doesn't get different when they get to college, right? We lose, in our case, they go back to their countries of origins, they travel, they get work. The summer is our biggest black hole in terms of retention and engagement, right? And one of the challenges is that you cannot use either state or federal aid to come in the summer. One of the programs that we created with the coaches goes exactly to that. We had one student who was a coach, a former student at Hostos, ESL, fully TAP, fully Pell, into public assistance, living in NYCHA, single mom, right? Poster child of the American dream and community college. What did she do? She would save $300 from her Pell every semester. She'll have $600 at the end of the year, which is about the cost of what a summer class would cost at Hostos. So if she needed not to take a class in the spring because it was kind of rough balancing other things she did it, she will take the class this summer and she'd be whole. She graduated on time. She used the money to go to Lehman and graduate on time, got her master's, came back to work at Hostos. And then she was advising all her coachees that could to save Pell money to be able to use in the summer. Why? Because there were some students that she saw in the spring who were weak academically, who were smelling probation left and right. And if they go into probation, they're going to lose their financial aid. They're going to be dropouts. So she was able to advise some of those students, take a lighter load in the spring, increase your GPA, feel better about yourself, and with the money you save, you take your summer class, and in the fall, you're whole. So we sold that to Citibank, right? And what we're going to do is that we have now 50 students that we say, if you promise to save $600 from Pell, right, we'll keep it, and you'll come to the summer. You can use that money for a summer class. The college will give you a second summer class free and a Metro card, what we learned from ASAP, right, to make sure that you stay connected and you accelerate, right? And Citibank was so pumped that they decided to add financial literacy, which is what we're doing. We're teaching those students to save, to be smart about their financial aid, right? To accelerate and to complete, right? So those are some of the things that I think to do. So in that magical pot that Jonathan is throwing around, money for the summer, key to completion, key to acceleration, and I think higher ed as a whole, but community colleges have a lot of work to do in terms of using the summer productively to help our students.
Just two things. First of all, we haven't talked, I think, enough about transfer. I mean, most of our students want to transfer. It's certainly true at CUNY. I'm not sure what the SUNY, but I'm sure it's true. I mean, the vast majority at CUNY want to transfer. And I think that's important. If we can figure out how to streamline that process, it's going to help students coming in because that's what they want. I mean, right now we sort of put them through a liberal arts program that's not very well organized and doesn't actually, necessarily lead concretely to transfer. So that's an important thing, and I suppose some money could be spent on trying to straighten that out. I think that's one. I think also politically, by the way, if that works better, I think that will work with state legislators who often think, a bachelor's degree is the most important thing. So, if you can show the effectiveness of community colleges in leading people to a bachelor's degree, I think that's an important political point to be made in terms of asking for resources, whether it's more or just keeping the same. I think the second thing is, I think it's true that we need to have an alliance and a participation between all parts of society in this. It is definitely a huge problem. But I think there's some things that institutions can do. And I wouldn't want to say, let's wait until we have everybody on board before we can do. I mean, really, it's only been 10 or 15 years where we have seriously been looking at the issue of student success at community colleges. I mean, in a comprehensive way. I mean, every college, for as long as they've been there, have been concerned about the success of their students. I'm not saying that, but as far as a comprehensive analysis of what those problems are, it's not been very long. And I think we're beginning to see, solutions and ideas that are coming out, and I think those sometimes those can be done by institutions or at least by systems, working together. One of the issues, when we look at Gutman or we look at ASAP or we look at PTech, we have models that seem promising, but we also have to figure out which elements of those are crucial, right? So, I mean, these are packages of things, and sometimes they do cost more. It may not be that all of those things are necessary. So I just want to say, I'm very actually optimistic about progress that we can make. And I think we can do that both in an incremental as well as in a revolutionary way. And I think we should be working on both of those fronts.
That was actually my next question. I'm going to ask one more question, and then if anybody's interested in asking a question of our panelists, if you might line up behind the microphone over there. But first, I'm going to ask one last question. That is, we just talked about, what could the state do to help and support community college and support student success? And now I want to kind of put it on, what more can the institutions themselves do? Are there changes that you'd like to see? Are there specific things? We've already talked about some really great models and examples of what's already going on, but what more do the institutions need to do to really kind of get at the student success and move the needle on that? Felix?
Let me just say that, one of the other elements here too, and it goes, for example, across the board, but on an issue like remediation, I think is crucial, is the engagement of the faculty, right? And because a lot of the curriculum expertise to move the needle on those things is going to come as a result of what our faculty know works with the students. And in our case, for example, we've had 3 of the departments that work very closely with remedial education. When they did their program review, one of the things that we did was we got money from a grant, and we brought a consultant that they identified to help them rethink what elements of the remediation curriculum needed work and adjustment based on all the things that are being done. And we began testing a number of pilots that have to do with students that technically failed remediation but were high fails, right, and put them into other sequences that then they accelerated and they got the credits and they got in. And those were programs in which our faculty were really, really engaged. We have another group of faculty that on their own, the folks from digital design and math and science, they went to NSF and they're redoing the entry-level math curriculum through gaming, right, which the digital animation folks use, right? So, I mean, I was part of this meeting in which after the first year, and this is the students have to create game boards, right, prototypes that can be used to teach pre-algebra and algebra concepts in the class. And I was in a presentation in which my entire math faculty department was playing board games, right, that the students had designed in order to address remediation. And part of the grant is to then take that to our neighboring Bronx schools, high schools, with what we learned, so that then, remediation doesn't need to happen. So I think it's fundamental, Rear, to, engage the faculty so that the changes that are needed happen in conversation, and many of them also want to innovate and do, better things for the students. So I think that that's an important part that needs to be part of the conversation too.
Stan?
Yeah, I think I would put on the table one word, and that's change. Because I work in a fairly large institution. It's been in business for 100 years. We have 450,000 employees, and we had a crisis about 20 years ago where we practically went out of business, and we completely changed all of our education and training programs, because if we didn't, we're going to be out of business. So if you sort of looked at how we spend our $600 million worth of training dollars, it's much more experiential, it's much more project-based. We teach skills by having our employees work in teams. We send them on assignments together to do that kind of work. And we haven't won, but we're in the process of hoping to change on a regular basis. If we look at our collaborators and partners in higher education around the world, in India and China and the United States and Europe, whether they're 2-year schools or 4-year schools, change is a hard thing for them. And I think we need to ramp up the process of change. And I think if there was one thing that we could do, it would be to create more financial incentives so that people really would have an opportunity to master the process of change. You can't continue to offer the same courses taught in the same way when the demands of the workforce have changed so markedly, and whole new elements of work are being done, and being done in creative and different kind of ways. And if everybody teaches the same courses that they did 20 years ago, we're not going to get where we want to get. So I would say one word: change.
I'm conscious of the line of people standing up there to ask questions, but I was going to bring up the faculty issue as well, because that's significant. And not just full-time faculty, but recognize the percentage of our faculty who work part-time, who may teach only one class at a secondary or tertiary location. So how do we incorporate all of our faculty into these very important discussions? But since that's been taken, what I would just add is there's a piece that Kay McClenney did maybe less than a year ago called Piloting Ourselves to Death. We need to stop piloting these things. We can all describe these incredible programs that serve 50 students, and they're all successful, and I have 17,000 students. So what about the other 16,950? That's math. What about those students? If we think that something is actually valuable, we should implement it across the board. And it's not easy. I mean, we implemented drop for non-payment. We implemented deadlines a couple years ago. And, in many cases, you're going to get responses that would suggest you're taking buckets of kittens into the middle of your campus and killing them. You need to get the evidence. You need to make sure that this is something that makes sense. You've got to talk to the boots on the ground people, and they have great things to tell you about how your students engage with your institution and how they would change your institution and how they work around all of these policies you've put in place. And they don't follow any of them. They do what they need to do in order to get the students to where they need to be. And you should listen to those things, and when they make sense, you should implement them across the college. That's hard. But what we tend to do is pilot it with these 50 students, so then we build, unthinkingly, a program you could never scale up. Because when we give 50 kids 3 coaches each, and they're wonderfully successful, how do you do that for 16,950 students? You don't. Right. So you abandon it. You know, we need to stop doing that.
So 3 things real quickly. I totally agree with Ann, and actually my comments are in line with them. I think, number one, you were saying, what can institutions do? It's community colleges, but as you were mentioning, transfer, it's really about all of our colleges. And our Chancellor, Nancy Zimpher, has really lodged the charge that for all 64 campuses that we have across the state of New York, this is a problem that we have to conquer. The 3 things I believe our institutions can do. Over half of our community colleges are partners with an early college high school, whether it be P-TECH or Smart Scholars, and about a third of our 4-year institutions are. All of them should be partners. And I really believe that, especially in low-performing schools, every student should have an opportunity to participate in an early college high school. It should be statewide. Second, you've already mentioned some examples of what you're doing at Monroe and other colleges where we're looking at counseling students before they are placed into remediation so we can avoid unnecessary remediation. And I look at Tom because it's really looking at, and this is your point, looking at the research. We're almost beyond pilots now. We already know what works. So now it's time to figure out ways in which we can implement them. So like the last example, as we're looking at STEM, we know the Carnegie Foundation, for example, has a model, QuantWay, which has for math. Accelerated math, 3 times the success rate in half the time. We have a number of our campuses that are piloting it, but it's not enough to pilot it. So at Rockland Community College, for example, they took they first piloted it, they loved it. They took all of their math faculty and went to California. I might add, they went in the winter, so they were real happy to do that, to get the training. 11 of their full-time faculty members went to California to learn what the model is. It's not a product. You don't have to buy it. It is about an instructional model that works. They are now, this spring, offering it to all their incoming freshmen. So again, getting beyond the pilots, but institutionally looking at scale-up change.
All right, questions? Please just, if you could just state your name and affiliation and ask a brief question.
Yes, Steve London, Professional Staff Congress, City University of New York. I'd like to pick up on Ann and Felix's discussion of the lack of resources that you confront. You're on the ground, you know the real problems. Many of the things that have been discussed thus far are laudable programs, but they really are marginal given the magnitude of the problem. Mm-hmm. And I feel like we haven't really talked about the magnitude of the problem. We've referred to it, but not really addressed it. So if you look at CUNY, a majority of our students in the community colleges come from families that are below, at, or near the poverty level, the vast majority. There has been, at the same time, that there's been an increase in the number of students. There's been a historic disinvestment since 1990 in the whole higher education, public higher education system in New York State. And just since 2008, there's been more than 20% drop in state funding per FTE. The majority of our courses, the vast majority of our courses in community colleges, are taught by part-timers. And so you have this very contingent workforce, very good people, but they're not there to do the advising, they're not there to do the counseling, they're not there to guide students through the courses. So unless you are going to deal with this fundamental issue of the lack of full-time faculty, you're not going to be able to really deal with the magnitude of the problem. If you look at ASAP, which has been discussed, in positive terms, and I think it's a wonderful program. Let's understand that at CUNY, it more than doubled the instructional resources per FTE. More than doubled. So guess what? Who's surprised? You get better results. You give students money for books. You make sure they have their tuition paid. You give them the kind of supports they need, and we find better success. So I think that without really dealing with the magnitude of the problems that we confront, we are only going to be talking at the margins. As good as those efforts are, I feel that we owe it to our students and to our policymakers to really tell the truth.
Thank you. Is there any reaction?
Well, I mean, resources matter. I will not, which I think is a bottom line way of saying some of the things that you said. And it's something that I think most folks will echo here in the panel. How you use those resources, right, to get better results is obviously a separate conversation. But in our case, we have been, I mean, part of why we decided to invest, for example, in the coaches was because system-wide, the investment in full-time faculty was being done, right? So in our case, since that was coming out of the system, we used some of the money in our compact for the investment on the student support service side, which we felt was not growing at the rate that we needed to be able to address some of those things, right? But clearly, you do need the faculty, you know, and I mentioned that in my comments about the innovation on the curriculum side, right, in which they need to be able to do that. They're indispensable to, so resources do matter. I would not, the issue is then how do you use them to be able to, you know, to produce better results. So in that sense, I agree with you.
And I would jump in and say, I think I actually just addressed this a little bit around integrating the part-time faculty, but you know, I'm going to take a different approach to this and talk about where do we need to put our resources today when we're sitting up here, when Felix and I are sitting up here, and we're looking at our budgets. Where do our budgets go? And maybe 2 days ago, Matt Reed, Dean Dad, who's the VP at Holyoke Community College, wrote, you know, sort of not tongue-in-cheek request to philanthropists, specifically to the Gates Foundation, if you really want to help community colleges, develop our IT systems for us. Because I think if you talk to anyone who manages a campus, they'll tell you one thing, which is that the cost of the technology that we use to advise our students, to build these structures, to get this data out, it is growing faster than any of us can even attempt to budget for. The system, you know, Florida used to have a great system called TRACS, which was the transfer. I can't even tell you. I don't think they ever would even publicly tell you how much they invested in that system to build it to where it got. So that's one thing. You know, when you think about philanthropy and where we can talk about shared services and maybe, you know, some sort of shared system that we could all partake of, that would be incredible. The other thing that no one wants to talk about is regulation. You know, every time we get another Dear Colleague letter from the U.S. Department of Education, we end up adding 2 or 3 staff members to manage the requirements for regulation that now we're going to be held accountable for and fined if we don't meet. Those are resources I can tell you I would much rather put in my faculty and in folks who deal directly with students. But now I've got to add an assistant director of this or someone to manage this paper moving from here to the VA. Or if you're talking about veteran students, you need 3 or 4 people who can call the VA because the rules seem to change per student, per day, per hour on what's going to qualify and what isn't. You know, there are all sorts of things we're being forced to spend our dollars on right now that really take away from the broader completion agenda. And that's where I think if we could have a national conversation about that, that would be amazing.
Great. Next question.
Hi, Irma Rodriguez from Queens Community House. I guess I want to make a short and humble and self-serving suggestion that as one of the community-based organizations that's been running a pilot, and a very successful pilot, for a few years now around retention, that that you know, think about also bringing us to the table in some ways. And we also feel the same frustration. You know, the 300 or so students that we work with at the 2 community colleges that we're currently working, it's just 300 students. And so all the success in the world doesn't really have the broader impact if we can't have the conversation around how can we be helpful, either around advocacy or other types of activities that we could do in collaboration, or also, you know, how we could come together with other organizations that are doing similar types activities, you know, youth development in the community, youth workforce development in the community, how all of us could bring our resources to bear to maybe coordinate better and have this really lovely discussion amongst all of us.
Thank you.
Yes, hi, I'm Elizabeth Lynham from the Citizens Budget Commission. I wanted to ask a little bit about one of the points in one of the slides from the opening presenter, the concept of pay for performance. We've seen a lot of different models over the years proposed in New York State. You mentioned some of the states that are models for this elsewhere. I'm wondering what you think about sort of the best model, or a model that might work well for New York State and with the conditions that you've just outlined in your presentations.
I'll answer for Rich. Well, okay. I mean, I think that the effectiveness and the actual impact of these programs is still up in the air. So I don't think that there's at least a research-based answer to your question about, well, I mean, you know, the kinds of principles that people have used have been to try to have a variety of different ones, to use intermediate measures, not just graduation, so progression, accumulation of X number of credits, completion of developmental ed, those types of things, and to take account of the different characteristics of the students. So you don't want to be comparing Hostos to Westchester. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't be choosing examples, but nevertheless, yeah, reference, like, yeah. But I do think, and I do think that it has focused attention on discussion about completion and what that is. So I think it's been, and of course, once you start introducing this type of a discussion and people realize that their interests are going to be at stake, it does, you know, start a discussion about what it means, what completion is, what are successful these students, how do we measure them, and other types of things. So I think that's I guess I would encourage a discussion to get going with that, to look at the things that other states are doing, but I don't think we have an answer yet about the precise design of those. Is that okay, Rich?
Well, Richard, let me ask you, based on what you've seen in other states, would you recommend that New York, you know, kind of move towards performance-based funding for student success?
Well, I'd give exactly Tom's answer. But I will say, just from a narrow experience in Massachusetts over the past couple of years, because it's a state I live in, Massachusetts has moved towards performance-based funding in the past couple of years. And initially, the presidents were extremely nervous. This was going to, you know, throw off their way of doing business. They'd have to figure out new rules and all that. And can I stand up?
Can you get
the mic right there?
You can take this one, Rich.
I know now you're dying to know the end of the story. So the presidents at first were resistant, and they said, well, maybe we can hold it to, you know, 10% of the, you know, of the state dollars would go into performance, and the rest would be as it was. The state's Department of Higher Ed actually brought the presidents in to work with an outside technical advisor and to come up with they had a year to come up with the formula themselves. And by the end of that process, I was talking to one president who said, you know, we ended up at 50%. And I could have probably gone up to 100 and I wouldn't have cared that much. He said, because by the time we figured out what got weighted, what didn't get weighted, how irrational the previous way of funding was and unpredictable it was, and now we had a new set of rules that we were all going to play by. You know, it's going to be bumpy initially, but that those rules had us focusing on the things that mattered. And so I guess I think that there's a lot of potential for the reasons that, you know, that were mentioned about focus. And also, I said earlier about legislatures like to see this. And if you're thinking long-term, that may be, in itself a useful way to say, you know, we're serious about improvement, and we're going to, you know, we're going to deal with it, on the fiscal side, on the financial side. The last thing I would say is that it is, as in any big change, if you go out a few years, it's hard to quite figure out, you know, what some of the scenarios are of how it could either sustain itself or where it might blow up. You know, so an example might be, you know, a rural legislator has a college in his or her district. That college is not doing that well, you know, in terms of competing again, you know, not doing that well on the performance, you know, funding process. And over time, that legislator gets a lot of pressure, and that legislator happens to be the head of the education committee or the higher education committee in the state, and who knows what happens at that point. So, I mean, these things are, you know, there are things to be concerned with, but I think that just the messaging is right, the focus is right, and I think if you also build in both a learning curve, a learning period for the institutions to say, you've got new rules, and so let's figure out how to do it well with the new rules. You can have a year or two to kind of learn with each other about how to improve performance. That would be a good thing. So I think there are a lot of ways to mitigate the potential downsides and to make the most of both the discussion and movement towards performance funding.
Thank you.
Just some nuances. First, there was a conversation too, but in the community colleges, which is where it got approved, right, the performance base, their budgets remained the same or more for the first couple of years. So it was not just a year of conversation and buy-in, which is crucial, right? But financially too, right? They were held harmless until some of the things were figured out. And I think that's an important thing to, because, you can have a lot of conversations, but the bottom line is the bottom line, right, in terms of resources. And I think it's very important to remember what you both said, that there's really a lot of talk about that with very little data in terms of information of the examples, right? And we need to navigate that with care, right? And actually, we're inviting Richard and his colleagues to come talk to our faculty at Ostos about how they did things in Massachusetts, because I think it is important that we have these conversations in our campuses about what's happening and we're all better informed. The other things about some of these things, and again, these might not be a perfect comparison, right? But I was talking to a doctor friend of mine, and because, I think it's right. You guys should be paid by the number of students you graduate. And I said, but, Flaco, there's cost that we're incurring whether the student graduates or not, right? Would it be fair in a hospital not to pay you, the patient goes and they die? Well, it's not the same thing. No, it's not the same thing, right? But, but I do think that clearly we want to push the envelope. We want to be more accountable. But again, we need to have comparisons that are apples to apples, and we need to have things based on good data, good examples, and that's what's going to lead to good policy.
I'll just add one more thing, because I worked in a performance-based funding state in Florida. I know CCRC has studied Florida. Florida had performance-based funding for a long time, built a system that was a little too heavy and sort of fell apart after a while. But you need, all cars look like cars, but then you lift up the hood and they look different underneath. And so you need to look at what's going on in the states where performance-based funding may be integrated more successfully than others. So I'll just take Florida as an example since I know it. Florida has common course numbering. Florida also has a very rigid system of core curriculum. So the nursing program at my institution looked identical to the nursing program, say, at Miami-Dade, even though my institution that I worked at in Florida had 15,000 students, and Miami-Dade at the time had about 90,000 students. Now they have about 137,000. So, you know, you were literally comparing apples to apples when you compared the programmatic completion rates across those two. In remedial work, the state of Florida, when it offered remedial work and offered performance-based funding along completion of that, there was a common state curriculum. There was a common state exit exam that everyone had to administer. You know, I don't even want to know how long we'd all be sitting up here if we had those discussions in this state. We'd all be retired before we would need to worry about it, I think. So, you know, a lot of those things work more easily in very centralized system where there has been very much, I would say, control from the very beginning on how the system developed and was structured. It's harder to force fit it after the fact, and that's where you really need a lot of discussion in setting up the policies that would be necessary to support an effective PBF system.
Thank you, great discussion. We have about 3 minutes left, so if you can try to keep your question brief.
Okay, I'll try. I'm Mary Stalker. I'm the child care coordinator at SUNY, so I work with the child care centers on the community college campuses. Kate started out by saying that access to high-quality early care and education puts children on a pathway to success, including the likelihood of eliminating the need for remedial education when they get to the college level. That along with the fact that parents who have access to childcare and use on-campus childcare have a higher graduation rate than their peers. I'm wondering what all of you think about putting some of that hypothetical $1 billion towards your early care and education programs on campus.
Well, we have a child care center. You probably work with Ann. So we have a child care center on campus. We also subsidize child care for many of our students. I think when we go back to how many of our students are adults who have other dependents, that's incredibly important. I'm part of the local, in Rochester, we call it Rock the Future, the Strive Together framework there. Our first point of emphasis has been third grade literacy, right, which is the prime mover for someone to graduate high school on time, more likely to be college ready is if they read at grade level by third grade, and that reading without summer learning loss continues up that continuum. So I can't tell you how important adequate and more than adequate quality childcare is, not just to the lives of the students who are in our childcare center, but to the lives of the parents who are studying. When we look at our downtown campus, 2/3 of the students at our downtown campus are women. About 3/4 of those women have children. They can't focus on going to college if they're worried about their own kids because their mother's first, often students 15th, you know, after so many other things. So, you know, all of this stuff, it goes back to the community-based organization, providers getting around the table. All of this stuff is linked together. So definitely, I think some of the money needs to go there because it would support our students finishing their degrees.
Okay, really quick, last question. I'm sorry we couldn't.
Sure. Sorry, Pat. My name is Melinda Mack. I run the New York Association of Training and Employment Professionals, which wrote the Skills to Compete report that Dr. Kress mentioned. My question really is around the disconnect between the workforce side of the house of community colleges and the actual credit-bearing side of the house, and what we can do to better connect those two and to connect that to the economic development activity that is so heavily pushed in the governor's state of the state. We seem to be a stutter step behind often in the economic development work.
And if you want to add a little comment to, how do you fit people with disabilities into all this discussion about remediation? Because I haven't heard one iota of any of that, and that is, I think, your biggest struggle with your remediation, is that kids with learning disabilities have not been given the right course of classroom instruction to even get close to what Stan's asking for from a business perspective. So.
All right, so this is we got like really two minutes, but the workforce development side of things, and also kind of people with disabilities and the how do you
Well, I'll take the workforce one really quickly and just give you a concrete example. We have a regional focus. We work with Finger Lakes Community College, and I know that Karen was on your committee. So Finger Lakes has a non-credit program around machining with GW Lisk, an employer. They don't have a credit program. They came to us and asked us if we could work with them around taking this non-credit training, determining a number of credits with some of our programs that it might qualify for, leveraging those into our credit machining program, and then moving forward. And we've done just that. You know, this is something when you talk about what we can do at our own institutions, we're the ones who are standing in the way of doing that. So if we get the right people, faculty, subject matter experts, along with industry folks around the table, they can figure out how to ladder those non-credit certificates into credit programming. And that's how you build those stackable credentials that click together like Legos and then get somebody eventually a degree that'll get them employed by IBM or GW Lisk or Optimax.
Yeah, just briefly, in terms of the students at the first P-Tech school in Brooklyn, about 50% of them were special ed, and a lot of them are doing very, very well. And if you sort of looked at where they are right now, they're taking college courses and they're passing college courses. And a lot of those students were misdiagnosed. They had reading problems. I think about 60% of our 9th graders started with 5th grade reading levels or below. And they moved up very, very quickly, and they're taking and passing college courses. So I'm not suggesting that that's a solution for every student, but provided the right kind of instructional program, I think you can get past it for some kids. From the standpoint of broader issues about people with disabilities, you know, the federal government is now leaning very, very hard on government contractors in terms of what percentage of your workforce are people with disabilities. And you're seeing a big, big change that's taking place in terms of people moving to try to put in place those kind of systems that will allow them to hire more people with serious disabilities. And I mean, maybe that's going to be something that's going to happen on the state level as well.
Advising resources, our coaches have been able to help us a lot in identifying the students that have some of those issues and connect them with the appropriate campus resources. So it goes back to, if we have more people that could pay attention to the students that come in, we'll do a much better job in all those areas. And on the workforce, it's a challenge, and we deal with silos. In CUNY, continuing ed and workforce tend to be separate divisions from academic affairs, and we make progress. But the other way is also by signaling that it's all one institution. And one of the things, you know, I did is that we moved career services, which normally reports to student affairs, into workforce development. Signaling that all the work that we want to do on job readiness and careers was going to be connected on this side, and how an institutional, it's an experiment. Maybe in 3 years I'm here and telling you that it stank, right? But it's ways in which you try to institutionally send the message that it has to be a lot more integrated, and it's not just the typical workforce academic affairs, but all throughout the institution.
Thank you, thank you. I wish we could keep this discussion going, but we're really we're going to wrap up by bringing up Deborah Povich, who is the co-manager of the Working Poor Families Project. Thank you, Deborah, for your support for this conversation. But before we do, I just wanted to mention, if anybody is interested in getting some more information from what we've done, the Center for an Urban Future, you can go on our website, nycfuture.org. We have 2 reports on community colleges that have been mentioned here, most recently Completion Day. But Deborah, who is going to say a few closing remarks.